I'm Lauren Mitchell, 33 years old, and for most of my life I've been the dependable one, the daughter who always showed up, the one who covered last-minute bills and smoothed over every awkward silence. That night at my father's 65th birthday dinner, I arrived early as usual, carrying his favorite bottle of wine and a neatly wrapped gift. I was used to the quiet kind of exclusion, the polite forgetfulness that left me standing just outside the circle. But when my sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "Sorry, this table's for family only," while pointing toward a folding chair near the trash cart, something inside me shifted. I smiled, nodded, and sat where she told me. Yet before the night was over, one sentence would change everything, and it wouldn't come from her. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been made to feel small in a room you helped build. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside St. Louis, the younger of two girls. My parents raised us to value kindness, humility, and hard work. But somewhere along the way, those values turned into expectations, ones that never seemed to apply equally. Vanessa. My sister was the star from the start. She had a voice that carried through every school auditorium, a laugh that made people lean in closer, and a knack for charming any room she walked into. I admired her once. But admiration is hard to hold when it becomes the reason you disappear. Our parents used to say Lauren's so steady you never have to worry about her. And they didn't. I made straight A's, held part-time jobs, and never missed curfew. I patched my own flat tire at 16 and didn't tell anyone because it didn't seem worth the trouble. I wasn't the child who drew attention. I was the one who made sure things ran smoothly. Vanessa got framed photos on the mantle. I got quiet thank yous whispered in passing. I told myself that being dependable was enough, that love didn't have to look like celebration. When I left for college 3 states away, I thought distance might reset things. I majored in marketing, worked through school, and eventually built a small firm of my own. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I bought a modest condo, adopted a rescue dog, and started living life on my own terms. Still, I called home every Sunday. I sent gifts for every birthday and holiday, even when no one remembered mine. Part of me kept hoping they'd notice the woman I'd become, not just the girl who could be counted on to handle the details. That hope was why I agreed without hesitation when Mom called about Dad's birthday dinner. Her voice carried that familiar sweetness she used whenever there was a favor coming. "It's going to be special," she said. "Could you put down the deposit, just to hold the reservation?" I didn't even ask how much. I wired $1,000 that afternoon and picked out a navy box to hold the golf print I'd ordered for Dad's gift. I told myself it would be worth it this time, that maybe this dinner would feel different. Rose Ember wasn't the kind of place you went to casually. The lights were warm, the waiters wore earpieces, and the menus didn't bother listing prices. I arrived early, dressed in a satin dress I hadn't worn in years, the kind that made me feel seen. The hostess led me upstairs to the private dining room where laughter was already spilling out through the door. Inside, my family filled a long mahogany table, Vanessa in cream silk, my parents glowing with pride, cousins and uncles leaning in close as if the night were already perfect. No one looked up when I entered. I stood there a moment, unsure, before my sister finally turned with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lauren?" "You made it," she said, gesturing toward a fold-out chair by the wall. "Sorry, this table's for family only, but we saved you a spot right there." A few people chuckled, and my mother's quick wave was followed by the same look she gave me when I overreacted as a child, one that said let it go. I walked to the chair, sat down, and set the gift box carefully at my feet. I told myself not to make a scene. I told myself it was just another dinner. For the next 2 hours, I watched from the sidelines as they toasted, took photos, and passed around dishes I was never offered. My father laughed until tears ran down his cheeks when Vanessa handed him a framed photo from a family trip years ago, the one I hadn't been invited to because they didn't think I'd want the noise. By the time the waiter brought out dessert, my heart had settled into a quiet rhythm of disbelief. I wasn't angry yet, just tired of pretending that smallness was grace. When the black folder landed on the table and the waiter began scanning the crowd, I already knew who he was looking for. My card was on file, my name was on the reservation. His polite voice cut through the chatter. "Excuse me, ma'am, should I run the final total on the same card used for the deposit?" Every conversation stopped. The room went still, faces turning toward me for the first time that night. And in that frozen silence, with champagne glasses half raised and the scent of lemon and shrimp thick in the air, I realized I had reached the end of whatever this had been. I met the waiter's eyes steady and calm and smiled. What I said next would echo louder than any toast made that evening. When the waiter asked if he should charge the total to my card, I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. The chatter faded, and even the faint jazz from the speakers seemed to pause. I could see my reflection in the window behind them, steady quiet, holding my ground. I smiled, looked him in the eye, and said softly, "Not my table." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, like the room itself had been waiting for someone to finally say those words aloud. The waiter blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he asked. My voice didn't shake when I repeated it just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I paid the deposit, but I was told this table's for family only." Someone gasped, a sharp intake of air that broke the stillness. Vanessa's face went pale. My mother looked down at her plate. Even my father, so used to letting uncomfortable moments pass, shifted in his chair and cleared his throat. "Lauren, honey," he said carefully, "you already paid half. You might as well finish it." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Might as well. The same phrase he'd used my whole life, tossed out whenever I was expected to take care of something quietly. It carried the weight of every time I'd been told to smooth things over, to not make a scene, to do what was practical. I stood slowly, pushing back my chair. The sound of metal scraping against tile cut through the air. "You're right," I said. "I did pay the deposit. I booked this place, picked the flowers, arranged the car service. And for that, I got a seat next to the trash can." My eyes moved across the table, landing on Vanessa, then my parents. "So now you can figure out the rest." No one spoke. The waiter still stood there, folder in hand, frozen between duty and discomfort. I turned toward the door, feeling the sting of the night air on my face before it even touched me. My heels echoed on the marble stairs, steady and unhurried, until I stepped out into the cold February wind. I took a deep breath and kept walking, passing the line of parked cars and the glowing restaurant windows. Inside, laughter started again, thin, forced, the kind that tries to fill the space left behind when something true has been said. By the time I reached my apartment, the city was quiet. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the kitchen island, the gift from my father still sitting in its box unopened. My phone started buzzing before I'd even taken off my coat. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk." "Dad." "That was uncalled for. You embarrassed everyone." "Vanessa, you just had to make it about you, didn't you?" I stared at the screen until it went dark, then turned it face down. I wasn't angry, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when everything has been blown into clarity. At 10, the phone lit up again with a name I hadn't seen in months, Madison. Vanessa's ex-girlfriend. I hesitated before answering. "Hi," she said softly, her voice uncertain. "I hope this isn't weird." I was at the dinner. I blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" "Vanessa told everyone I was a friend from yoga," she said with a short laugh that didn't sound amused. I was sitting with Claire near the back. There was a pause before she continued. "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. All of it. And I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say." Madison kept talking, her tone quiet but steady. "After you left, Vanessa tried to make it sound like a misunderstanding. Blamed the waiter. Blamed you. But everyone knew. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't argue. You just told the truth, and it scared her." I closed my eyes and let her words sink in. "You don't have to explain," she added. "I just wanted you to know someone saw you tonight." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, just empty of expectation. I poured a glass of water and stared at the reflection of the city lights across the window pane. I realized I could have brought gold, and they still would have pointed me to the corner. But this time, I hadn't stayed there. The next morning, my phone lit up again, this time with the family group chat that had been silent for months. Mom wrote first, "You hurt your father. Please call." Then Dad, Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Just apologize and move on. Vanessa followed with her usual sharpness. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Hope it was worth it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to fix. I'd spent years patching cracks in a wall that wasn't mine to hold up. By noon, another notification appeared, a voice message from Vanessa. I pressed play. Her tone was clipped, full of the brittle edge she used when she felt cornered. I hope you're happy, she began. You ruined Dad's birthday. You always act like the victim. Maybe if you weren't so cold, people would actually want you at the table. I stared at the screen, then deleted the message. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I opened my laptop, found the email thread with the restaurant, and pulled up every receipt, the deposit confirmation, the florist invoice, the framed golf print I'd ordered, even the car service I'd booked for my mother. I drafted a new email and addressed it to the family. Hi, all I wrote. Since there seems to be confusion about my intentions, I thought it might help to clarify with facts. I listed the expenses one by one down to the dollar. All of this was handled on my card. No one offered to reimburse me, nor did I ask. I did it because I was told this dinner was about honoring Dad. But I was also told quite clearly that I wasn't considered part of the family that night. I won't be covering the remaining $4,900. I didn't eat. I wasn't seated. I wasn't welcome. And frankly, I'm tired of paying for rooms that won't even offer me a chair. Best, Lauren. I read it once more before hitting send. It felt clean, sharp in its simplicity. Within minutes, replies started arriving. My cousin Jenna wrote, "Good for you. We saw what happened. It was cruel." Uncle Leo chimed in. Wish I'd had the guts to say something. I'm sorry. Even Aunt Karen, who avoided confrontation like it was a sport, replied simply, "About time someone said it." No message came from my parents. None from Vanessa either. But a few hours later, a text appeared from an unfamiliar number. Hi, this is Claire. We met once through Madison. I just wanted to say that email, it's making the rounds. People are talking, and they're not on Vanessa's side this time. I leaned back in my chair, the corners of my mouth lifting in something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. For years, I had poured time, money, and care into a family that treated my help like air, always there, never noticed. Now, for the first time, the story wasn't being told by them. Later that afternoon, I opened my banking app. At the top of the list was a shared emergency fund I'd kept with my parents and Vanessa for 4 years. It had been used often. Dad's dental work, Vanessa's car repairs, Mom's temporary expenses that never got paid back. I stared at the balance just under $30,000 and felt the same quiet certainty I'd felt at the restaurant. With a few taps, I transferred the entire amount to my personal account and closed the joint fund for good. The phone rang minutes later. Vanessa's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. What the hell, Lauren? She snapped. You closed the account. I just tried to make a payment. I didn't raise my voice. I did. And it's done. There was a long pause on the other end. You can't just... I interrupted. And I did. You're being vindictive, she said, her voice rising. No, I answered quietly. I'm being done. There was another silence, this one heavier, unsure. When she finally spoke again, her tone had softened, cracking at the edges. You've never talked to me like this before. I exhaled slowly. That's because I used to think I had to earn love by staying quiet. But love that only exists when I'm convenient isn't love at all. I ended the call before she could reply. Then I opened the Notes app on my phone and started a list titled, Things I'm Done Doing. It filled faster than I expected, covering last-minute bills, driving hours for holidays no one cared about, pretending silence didn't hurt. I stared at the growing list and felt for the first time in a long while a deep, calm certainty. Outside, the evening light was softening against the buildings. I closed my laptop, poured another glass of water, and looked around my quiet apartment. The stillness no longer felt empty. It felt earned, and somewhere beneath that calm a new thought began to take shape, a quiet understanding that this wasn't the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a boundary. The morning after I closed the joint account, I woke to a quiet that felt almost foreign. No buzzing phone, no reminders to call, no unspoken obligations hanging over me. I made coffee and sat by the window watching the city come alive. For the first time in years, I didn't feel that tug of responsibility pulling me towards someone else's problems. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was space, and I didn't rush to fill it. By midday, I noticed the unread message counter growing again: texts, voicemails, emails. Some from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, others from numbers I didn't recognize. I skimmed through them briefly. A few were sympathetic, some curious, most filled with discomfort. What surprised me most was how calm I felt reading them. The noise didn't reach me the way it used to. It felt distant, like a storm already passing somewhere far away. That afternoon I got a new email, not from my mother or Vanessa, but from my father. The subject line was simple: "Lauren, I owe you an apology." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message was short, maybe 5 sentences at most. He said he hadn't realized how invisible I'd been made to feel, that Vanessa had always taken up all the air in the room, and that I'd made it easy for them not to notice. He didn't try to justify it, didn't shift the blame. He just said, "I didn't see it. That's on me." Then he added, "If you ever want to talk, I'll listen. No excuses. Dad." I read it twice. It wasn't warm, but it was real. For once, he wasn't asking me to fix things or come back to the family table to make peace. He wasn't telling me to apologize. He was just acknowledging it, everything I'd spent my life quietly absorbing. I didn't reply that day. I wasn't ready, but I saved the email. Something about it felt like the first brick being set on level ground. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. The family group chat that had once been filled with chain messages and holiday reminders went completely still. No one tried to call after that. "No, we miss you, no. You should visit." I thought the emptiness might ache, but it didn't. It felt like peace disguised as distance. Work filled my time again. I took on 2 new clients at my marketing firm, something I hadn't done in months, because family emergencies always seemed to find me first. I worked late, cooked for myself, and started walking to a nearby park in the evenings, letting the air clear my thoughts. Somewhere between the walks and the quiet dinners alone, I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to check in. That part of me, the one that always needed to be acknowledged, was starting to fade. A week later, I booked an appointment with a therapist. I told her I wasn't sure what I needed, only that I didn't want to keep pretending I was fine when I wasn't. Her name was Dr. Haley Ross, a calm woman in her 50s with a soft voice and eyes that didn't rush you. She asked simple questions about my family, my childhood, what it meant to be the dependable one. For the first time, I heard myself say out loud how exhausting it had been to hold everything together for people who never once asked how I was doing. She didn't interrupt, just nodded, letting the words find their way out. Over the next few weeks, our sessions became a space I looked forward to. We talked about boundaries, about silence, and how sometimes what people call being easygoing is really just surrender. She helped me see that peace isn't the same as absence, that it's something you build, not something that happens once everyone leaves you alone. I started noticing small changes. My mornings weren't heavy anymore. I began keeping my phone on silent through the night without guilt. On weekends, I took the long drive to the coast just to breathe air that didn't remind me of anyone else's demands. I wrote lists not of things to fix, but of things I wanted to try. Pottery classes, hiking trails, a trip to Santa Fe I'd postponed twice because of family gatherings. This time, I booked it. When I told Dr. Ross about the trip, she smiled and asked, "What are you hoping to find there?" I thought about it for a moment. Nothing I said, just quiet. Santa Fe was everything I needed it to be. The mornings smelled like coffee and cedar, and the afternoons carried a dry, sun-warmed calm I hadn't felt in years. I spent hours walking through art markets listening to the low hum of conversation, the sound of silver jewelry clinking softly as vendors arranged their displays. No one there knew my last name. No one expected anything from me. On the second morning, I sat outside a cafe overlooking the plaza, writing in a small notebook I'd brought along. At first, I didn't know what to write. Then slowly the words came, small truths I'd never said aloud. Things like, "You can love people and still stop letting them hurt you." And silence doesn't always mean grace. Sometimes it means erasure. The sentences weren't polished or planned. They were just honest. I wrote until my hand cramped, then closed the notebook and let the sunlight warm my face. That evening I wandered into a small gallery tucked between adobe walls. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Evelyn, greeted me with a soft smile. Her hair was silver, tied loosely behind her shoulders, and she spoke in that slow, thoughtful way people do when they've learned to live at their own pace. We talked for nearly an hour about art, about starting over, about how sometimes family isn't the one you're born into, but the one you build around shared peace. When I left, she handed me a postcard with a quote printed on it. "You are not obligated to stay where you are diminished." I slipped it into my notebook and carried it home. When I returned from Santa Fe, my apartment felt lighter somehow, like I'd left the version of myself who begged to belong somewhere back in the desert air. I unpacked slowly, then placed the postcard on my fridge. The next morning, I brewed coffee and stood there reading it over and over, as if it were a quiet promise I intended to keep. Later that week, I got an email from an old friend, Talia, a designer I'd worked with years ago. She'd seen my message about the closed account and the dinner through someone's social media repost, and she wrote, "If you ever want to talk, I've got an extra seat at my Sunday table. No family drama, just food and laughter." I hesitated before replying, but that Sunday I went. Her apartment was warm and cluttered in the best way, candles flickering, music. Low, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. There were 5 other people around the table, none of whom I knew, but within minutes it felt natural. No one asked about my family. No one expected me to explain myself. We just ate, laughed, and shared stories until late into the night. When I left, Talia hugged me and said, "You're welcome any time." That evening, walking home under the streetlights, I realized I'd felt something I hadn't in years, belonging without effort. It wasn't the same as forgiveness or even closure. It was simpler than that. It was acceptance, the kind that doesn't ask you to shrink or prove anything. When I got home, I wrote a note in my journal. Peace doesn't ask for permission. It just needs space to grow. As I set my pen down, my phone buzzed once, a new email from my father's subject line, blank. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there, knowing that whatever it said, I could face it without losing myself this time. Outside, the night was quiet again. But it wasn't the silence of absence anymore, it was the silence of beginning. The night after I returned from Santa Fe, I unpacked slowly, letting the rhythm of ordinary things ground me again. My clothes still carried the faint scent of desert air, of sage and sun. I left the small notebook I'd been writing in on my kitchen counter next to the postcard Evelyn had given me, the one that read, "You are not obligated to stay where you are diminished." I must have read that sentence 100 times before bed. It wasn't advice, it was confirmation. When morning came, I opened my laptop and saw my father's name sitting at the top of my inbox again. This time the subject line was blank. I hesitated, then clicked. His message was longer than the last. He said he'd been thinking about the silence in our house growing up, how it had been easy to confuse my quiet for contentment. He admitted that he and Mom leaned on me because I never complained, and that Vanessa learned early how to fill the room with herself, because she knew we'd all let her. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just wrote, "I can't change how we treated you, but I can start noticing when I'm wrong." It was the first time my father had ever admitted fault without a reason attached. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I spent the day in my office catching up on client calls, trying to focus on work that required more logic than feeling. But his words lingered, and by evening I found myself standing in the kitchen reading them again under the soft yellow light above the counter. Something in me loosened, something small but steady. I didn't know what rebuilding would look like yet, but I knew it couldn't begin without truth. That weekend, I met Talia for coffee. She'd become a quiet anchor in the weeks since her Sunday dinner, a reminder that family could exist without blood. We sat by the window of a small cafe that smelled of cinnamon and rain. She looked at me over her cup and said, "You look lighter." I smiled. "Maybe I am." She nodded, then reached into her bag and pulled out a flyer. "I'm hosting a community design fair next month. I could use a hand with the event layout if you're interested." I took the paper from her and studied it. It was the kind of project I used to say no to, too personal, too time-consuming, too far outside my comfort zone. But now I heard myself say yes. Over the next few weeks, I helped her plan sketching booth layouts, calling vendors, and working with a small team of volunteers. We met in the evenings, the kind of easy gatherings where everyone brought something, brownies, music ideas, and no one kept score. Somewhere between those late-night planning sessions and shared takeout dinners, I realized how much I'd missed being part of something that didn't demand my silence. During one of those meetings, a volunteer named Kevin mentioned his mother was hosting a local support group for adult children of emotionally distant families. I wasn't sure if it was something I needed, but the idea stayed with me. A few nights later, I drove across town and sat in a circle of strangers inside a church basement that smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. The facilitator, a woman named Nora, invited us to introduce ourselves. When it was my turn, I said, "I'm Lauren. I've spent most of my life trying not to take up space." The group nodded, not with pity but understanding. That simple acknowledgement felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Over the next hour, people shared stories of being overlooked, of carrying burdens that weren't theirs. No one interrupted. No one offered quick fixes. When the session ended, Nora handed out a sheet titled, "Boundaries are bridges, not walls." The words at the top stayed with me. Every no you say to others is a yes to yourself. Driving home that night, I repeated it under my breath until it started to feel natural. The next morning, I called my therapist and told her about the meeting. She smiled through the phone and said, "Sounds like you're finding your people." Maybe I was. For years, I had mistaken independence for isolation. Now I was learning that strength could exist alongside connection as long as it came from choice. A week later, I got a text from my mother. "Can we talk?" It was short, cautious. I read it twice before replying. "We can, but not tonight." I meant it gently. I wasn't ready to slip back into the rhythm of apology and justification. She didn't respond right away, but later that evening, another message came. "Whenever you're ready, I'll listen." It was simple, but it caught me off guard. Maybe she had been reading the same silence my father had finally noticed. That weekend, I went to the community fair with Talia and our team. The park was alive with color booths lined with handmade crafts, children chasing bubbles, live music humming in the background. I stood by the information table watching people laugh and trade stories, and realized how far I'd come from that night at Rosember. There was no trace of that woman sitting alone beside a trash bin, waiting for permission to belong. As the afternoon wound down, Talia handed me a small card she'd picked up from one of the booths. In soft cursive, it read, "You don't owe anyone your silence." She smiled. "Thought of you." I tucked it into my notebook next to Evelyn's postcard from Santa Fe, 2 reminders from women who didn't even know each other yet, somehow understood exactly what I needed to hear. That night back at home, I finally opened my father's second email again. This time, I typed a short reply. "Thank you for seeing it. That's a start." I didn't overthink it. I didn't reread it 3 times before sending. I just pressed send and let the quiet return. The following week, another envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar, my mother's looping cursive. Inside was a short letter written on cream stationery. "Lauren," it began, "I reread your email more times than I can count. I didn't realize how often we pushed you aside to keep peace. I was wrong. If you never want to come back, I understand. But if you do, I promise not to seat you by the trash can." I stood there on my front step, reading it, the afternoon light soft against the paper. It wasn't an apology wrapped in guilt or excuses. It was plain human and real. I folded it carefully and placed it inside my journal. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to call her. Some things don't need immediate answers. Sometimes acknowledgement is enough to keep the door unlocked. In the evenings that followed, I started writing again. Not the lists of anger or hurt I'd made before, but small reflections. What peace looked like, what forgiveness might one day mean, how it felt to stop asking for permission to exist. I wrote until the words began to shape something new, something closer to a promise than a confession. One night I closed my laptop, made a cup of tea, and stood by the window watching the city lights flicker below. The life I had now was quiet, but it was mine. and for the first time the quiet didn't feel like being alone. It felt like coming home. The next morning I added one last note to my notebook before heading out for work. Every time you choose peace over permission, you build your own table. I didn't know then that those words would carry me through what came next, because peace, I would soon learn, doesn't mean the storm won't return. It just means you finally know where to stand when it does. The week after my mother's letter arrived, something in me began to shift. I hadn't written her back, but I carried that folded page with me, tucked into my planner, pressed between notes and invoices like a quiet reminder that maybe not everything was beyond repair. Work was steady. My clients were kind, and for the first time in years, my energy wasn't consumed by family tension. But peace has a way of testing its own strength. It's only real if it holds when the past comes knocking. It was late March when Vanessa called again. Her name flashed on my screen while I was in a client meeting, and for a long minute I just watched it ring until the call went to voicemail. When I checked the message later, her voice was tight, rehearsed, almost brittle. "Lauren, we need to talk. It's about Dad. Please call me back." There was no apology in it, just urgency. Still, something in her tone told me it wasn't another manipulation. I called that evening. She answered on the first ring. "He's fine," she started, "but he was in the hospital this morning. Chest pains." My heart sank even before I could speak. "They're keeping him overnight for tests," she added quickly. "Mom's with him." I asked which hospital, and she hesitated. "St. Mary's, room 214. Her voice cracked at the end, and for once I didn't hear arrogance in it. I thanked her and said I'd stop by the next day. That night I barely slept. Memories flickered between the quiet hours, Dad teaching me how to parallel park in the church parking lot, the smell of his aftershave when he kissed my forehead before school. We hadn't spoken since his last email, but his words had softened something that years of silence hadn't managed to erase. By morning, I'd made up my mind. The hospital was calm when I arrived, sunlight spilling through wide glass windows that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Room 214 was at the end of the hall. I paused at the doorway before stepping inside. My father looked smaller, somehow half reclined in the bed of Eli, in his arm television muted on a news channel. My mother sat beside him, her purse in her lap. She looked up first, surprise flickering across her face. "Lauren," she said quietly, like the name itself was fragile. Dad turned his head, eyes widening a little before he smiled, a real one, soft and uncertain. "You came," he said. I nodded, pulling a chair from the corner. "Vanessa told me what happened." He waved a hand dismissively. "Just a scare. They said it's not a heart attack, just stress." The word lingered in the air. We all knew what kind of stress he meant, but didn't say it. Mom reached for his hand, then glanced at me. "Would you like some coffee? I can go down to the cafeteria." It wasn't really a question. She needed a reason to leave the room. When she was gone, Dad exhaled. "She's been hovering since 6 this morning. I think she's afraid to leave me alone." We sat in the quiet for a moment before he spoke again. "I read your message a dozen times, you know. The one with the receipts." His tone wasn't defensive, more reflective. At first I was angry, but then I realized, you were right to send it. You were right to walk out. I didn't know what to say. The honesty in his voice felt like a language we'd both forgotten. "I didn't come here to argue," I said finally. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." He nodded. "I am, or I will be, but I need to tell you something before you go." He paused, shifting slightly on the bed. "Your sister's been having a hard time. Lost her job last month, and she's been staying with us." I felt the weight of old patterns pressing against my chest. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. He looked at me, studying my face the way he used to when I was a teenager telling half-truths. "She's trying, Lauren, but she's scared. Everything's catching up with her." He hesitated. "Would you consider talking to her? Not for us, for her." The request caught me off guard. For a moment, the quiet between us felt like a test. I thought of that night at Rose Ember, the way she'd smirked and pointed to the fold-out chair, how she'd laughed when I left. I met his gaze and said, "I'll think about it." He nodded as if that was more than he'd hoped for. Later in the parking lot, the wind carried that faint hospital scent, sterile, but oddly human. I sat in my car for a long time watching families come and go. My phone buzzed again, a text from Vanessa. "Thanks for coming. I know it's complicated." I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. That weekend, I went back to my usual routine: morning walks, grocery runs, quiet evenings with my notebook. But my father's words followed me. I kept replaying them during the still hours after work. By Sunday night, I sent Vanessa a message. "I'll meet you for coffee. Neutral ground." She replied almost instantly. "Thank you. Anywhere you want." We chose a small cafe downtown, one with big windows and low chatter that made it easy to hide nerves. When I arrived, Vanessa was already there, her hair pulled back, eyes tired but clear. She looked different, less composed, more human. When I sat down, she didn't waste time. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Not the fake kind, the real one." I waited, unsure where to look. She clasped her hands together. "That night at Dad's dinner, I knew what I was doing. I wanted to embarrass you. I thought it would make me feel powerful again." Her voice broke slightly, but it didn't. It just made me smaller. I didn't interrupt. She went on, her words tumbling out like a confession. "You've always been the one who handled things, and I resented you for it. You made me look lazy even when you weren't trying to. I kept trying to prove I mattered more, and instead I turned into someone I barely recognize." When she finally stopped, her eyes glistened. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I want to fix what I can." I sat there, the steam from my coffee curling between us, soft and slow. I thought of every quiet moment that had brought me here: the hospital, my father's emails, the letter from Mom. For years I'd been starving for an apology that felt real, one without excuses. And now it was right in front of me. "I don't know what the future looks like," I said finally, "but I accept your apology." Her shoulders eased, the kind of release that comes from years of tension unraveling all at once. "Thank you," she whispered. We talked for over an hour. Not about the past, but about where we'd been since then. She told me she'd been seeing a counselor too, trying to understand why she treated love like competition. I told her about Santa Fe, about the notebook, about finding peace that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. When we stood to leave, she hugged me. It was brief but steady. Driving home, I rolled the window down, letting the cool air brush against my face. For the first time, the idea of family didn't make my stomach tighten. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was honest, and that felt like the beginning of something worth holding on to. That night, I opened my journal and wrote one simple sentence. "Forgiveness isn't a reunion, it's the release that lets you breathe again." I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I was ready for it. The next morning when my phone buzzed, I smiled before I even checked the screen. It was a message from Dad: "Breakfast soon." My treat this time, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't hesitate before replying, "I'd like that." Breakfast with my father was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel heavy, but now just felt real. We met at a small diner on the edge of town, the one with cracked red booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. When I walked in, he was already there, menu open, reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up and smiled, small but genuine. "You look well," he said as I sat down. I smiled back. "You too." The waitress poured our coffee, and for a few minutes we just listened to the clatter of plates and low hum of conversation around us. Finally, he folded the menu and leaned back. "I wanted to thank you for coming," he said, "and for giving your sister a chance." I nodded. "She told you?" He chuckled lightly. "She tells me everything now. It's new for both of us." His tone was half amused, half proud. Then he grew serious. "Lauren, I owe you more than I can explain. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, but I'd like to keep trying." It was strange hearing that kind of honesty from him, simple, unpolished, free of the usual defenses. "Trying sounds like a good place to start," I said. He reached across the table, his hand resting near my coffee cup, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the warmth between us. "You know," he said softly, "you've always had your grandmother's way. She used to say peace isn't something you wait for, it's something you practice." I smiled faintly. I remembered my grandmother, patient, steady, always humming while she worked. It felt fitting that her words would find their way back to me now. After breakfast, he insisted on paying. "My treat this time," he said with a grin. We walked out together, the morning air cool and bright. When we reached the parking lot, he hesitated. "Your mom's been wanting to call you," he said. "She's giving you space, but she misses you." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "I'll think about it." He seemed to understand that was the best answer I could give for now. We hugged, an awkward, hesitant thing, but when he pulled back, I saw something lighter in his expression. The next few weeks passed quietly. I threw myself into work, helped Talia prepare for another event, and even joined Kevin's group again one Thursday night. During one of the sessions, Nora, the facilitator, asked each of us to describe what forgiveness looked like now that we'd practiced it. When it was my turn, I said, "It's choosing to stop explaining myself to people who were never listening." The group nodded. It wasn't about shutting anyone out. It was about not needing permission to stand where I was. That night after the meeting, I found a voicemail waiting on my phone. My mother's voice was gentle, careful. "Hi, honey. I just wanted to say your father told me you had breakfast. That made me happy. No pressure, but if you ever want to come by, the porch is always open." There was a pause before she added, "I made your favorite blueberry muffins. I froze a few just in case. I didn't delete it." I played it twice, then set the phone down. Over the next few days, I thought about that porch, the white swing that creaked in summer, the smell of honeysuckle that drifted in through the screen door. I'd avoided it for years, not because it held bad memories, but because it reminded me of all the times I'd sat there trying to feel included. But now the idea of returning didn't feel like surrender. It felt like reclaiming something that had always been mine. The following Sunday, I baked my own batch of blueberry muffins and drove to my parents' house. I didn't tell them I was coming. The house looked the same shutters, same wind chime by the door. My mother was on the porch watering her potted plants when she saw my car. For a second, she froze, hose still running, water spilling onto the steps. Then she smiled, her eyes bright. "You came." I held up the basket. "Brought muffins." She laughed, the sound breaking the tension that had hovered between us for too long. "Of course you did. Come in." Inside, the air smelled like coffee and lemon polish, a scent I hadn't realized I'd missed. My father was in the living room reading the paper. When he looked up and saw me, his whole face softened. "There she is," he said. No one rushed to talk about the past. No one tried to overcompensate. We just existed in the same space again, quietly, like people learning to speak a familiar language they'd once forgotten. After a while, Mom brought out a photo album I hadn't seen in years. It was thick, worn at the edges, filled with pages of birthdays, vacations, and moments frozen in time. There were pictures of Vanessa and me at the lake, arms wrapped around each other, hair tangled from the wind. I could tell Mom had added new pages, 2 more recent ones. There were photos of my father's retirement of Vanessa's birthday, and tucked in the back, a picture I didn't expect. It was from that night at Rose Ember. Someone had captured the table from afar, everyone laughing, glasses raised. But if you looked closely in the corner near the wall, you could see me, slightly blurred coat still on. My mother followed my gaze. "I kept it," she said quietly. I didn't know why at the time. Maybe to remind myself how easy it is not to see what's right in front of you. We sat together for a long time after that, flipping through pages, letting memories do the talking. When I stood to leave, she pressed the photo into my hand. "You should have this," she said. "You changed that night. We all did, whether we wanted to or not." Driving home, I thought about what she'd said. Change rarely arrives with fanfare. It creeps in quietly through small moments of courage, like saying no or showing up anyway. A few days later, I met Vanessa for lunch again. This time there was no tension, just conversation that flowed easily. Work updates, plans for the future, even a few shared laughs. When the check came, she reached for it first. "Let me," she said firmly. I didn't argue. It wasn't about the money. It was about balance finally finding its place between us. That evening I called my dad. "Mom told me about the picture," I said. He chuckled. "Of course she did. She's been carrying that thing around like a confession." We talked for a while about the garden, his new doctor's advice, small things that felt surprisingly precious. Before hanging up, he said, "Your grandmother would be proud of you, you know? You didn't let bitterness win." After the call, I sat by my window, city lights flickering below, and realized how different my world had become. The same family that once made me feel invisible was now learning slowly to see me. And I was learning to see them too, not as villains or heroes, but as people trying to unlearn old habits. As the night deepened, I opened my journal again. I wrote down something my therapist had said in one of our early sessions. Peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the ability to hear it without losing your balance. I finally understood what she meant. The next morning, I received an invitation from Talia dinner at my place this Saturday. Bring anyone you'd like. I stared at the message for a moment, then smiled and typed back, I might just do that. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to choose between family and peace. Maybe after everything they could coexist. And maybe this time I wouldn't be sitting beside the trash can. I'd be at the table by choice. Saturday evening arrived with a soft, golden light spilling across my kitchen counters. I'd spent most of the afternoon cooking roasted chicken with rosemary, a salad with citrus dressing, and a chocolate tart cooling by the window. Hosting again felt almost foreign after years of sitting quietly at someone else's table. This time the gathering was small familiar. Talia was coming along with Kevin, and I'd extended an invitation to my father, mother, and Vanessa. I hadn't expected them all to say yes, but they did. By 6, the doorbell rang. My father was first holding a small bouquet that looked awkward in his hands. "Your mother picked these," he said, offering them with a grin. A few minutes later, Vanessa arrived, dressed simply, her hair pulled back. She looked nervous but determined. My mother followed close behind, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "Just in case you ran out," she said, and we both smiled at the old habit. The air inside was warm, fragrant with food and candle wax. We gathered around the table, the same oak one I'd bought years ago when my apartment still felt too big for one person. Tonight it didn't. Conversation started cautiously, small remarks about work, the weather, the neighborhood. But slowly, something eased. My father complimented the salad. Vanessa asked Talia about her design projects. Mom poured more wine. It wasn't perfect silences still lingered in the spaces between, but it was progress. After dinner, Talia stood to make a toast. "To Lauren," she said, raising her glass, "for building a table that doesn't need permission to exist." The room went still for a moment, then my father chuckled softly. "That's a good one," he said, clinking his glass against mine. I smiled, touched but quiet. Vanessa's eyes shimmered in the candlelight, and when she met my gaze, she mouthed a small thank you. Later, as everyone moved to the living room for dessert, I slipped away to the kitchen to collect my thoughts. The hum of laughter drifted in from the other room, soft, tentative, but real. I caught my reflection in the window above the sink and almost didn't recognize the calm in my own face. For so long I had defined peace as distance. But maybe I thought it was also this, the quiet balance between forgiveness and self-respect. When I returned, my mother was flipping through the notebook that sat on my coffee table. The same one I'd filled with notes from Santa Fe and therapy sessions, half-finished lists, and scribbled thoughts about healing. She looked up quickly, almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have." I smiled gently. "It's all right." Her eyes fell on a page marked with a folded corner. "These rules you wrote, are they yours?" I nodded. "Rules for my table," I said. "I wrote them one night after everything happened." She read them quietly, her lips moving over each word. "No one who makes you feel invisible gets to eat first," she murmured. "Then love that comes with conditions isn't love." Her eyes welled slightly. "You really meant these." I nodded again. "Every word." She closed the notebook and handed it back carefully. "I wish I'd known how much you were hurting," she said softly. "I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet." I set the notebook down and reached for her hand. "So did I said. We were both wrong. Across the room, Vanessa was laughing at something Talia had said the sound light and genuine. For the first time in a long while, it didn't make me flinch. My father joined in, shaking his head, as if marveling at how different the evening felt. Maybe we all were. When they finally left, the night had deepened into that soft, silver quiet the city only gets on warm evenings. Vanessa hugged me first. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "For not giving up, Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm still learning." I smiled. "We all are." My father kissed my forehead. "Your grandmother would have been proud," he said again before walking to the car. Mom lingered last, standing by the doorway with her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "I don't know if I can ever undo what we did," she said quietly, "but I promise I'll never stop trying." I nodded, and this time when we hugged it felt easy, no tension, no unspoken weight, just two people finally meeting halfway. After they left, I gathered the glasses, blew out the candles, and stood for a long moment in the quiet. The air still carried traces of rosemary and wine. The table was a little messy crumbs, scattered napkins askew, but it was mine and it was full. Over the next few weeks, life found a new rhythm. My family didn't suddenly become perfect, but we talked more. My mother called without asking for anything. Vanessa sent photos of the volunteer project she'd joined, proud of the work she was doing. My father dropped by my office once with lunch just to say hello. It wasn't the old version of family, it was something rebuilt, smaller, more deliberate. One afternoon, I received a message from Kevin's group, Nora, the facilitator, inviting me to share a short story at an upcoming session about personal turning points. I almost declined. But then I thought about that night at Rose Ember, about the folding chair, and the silence that finally broke me open, and I said yes. When the night came, the community room was filled with soft light and folding chairs arranged in a circle. I spoke last. My hands trembled at first, but once I started, the words came easily. I told them about the birthday dinner, about what it felt like to be invisible in a room I'd paid to be part of. I told them about walking away not to hurt anyone, but to save myself. I described the email, the closed bank account, the first trip alone, and the quiet forgiveness that came after. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Nora smiled. "What changed for you most?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "I stopped waiting to be chosen," I said, and started choosing myself. Afterward, a woman I'd never met approached me. Her name was Dana, and she said, "That story, what you did, it gives people like me hope." I thanked her, but her words stayed with me long after I drove home. Maybe I thought that was the real purpose of all this, not revenge, not even resolution, but proof that survival could become something softer. That weekend, Talia invited me to another dinner at her place, a mix of friends and neighbors. When I arrived, the house was filled with laughter, the smell of lemon and sage. As I helped set the table, she asked, "How are things with your family?" I smiled, laying out the last fork. "Different," I said, "but good." Later that night, as we all sat down, Talia raised her glass again, echoing her toast from before. "To tables we build ourselves," she said. Everyone repeated it, voices overlapping softly. I looked around at faces new and old, at warmth that felt steady and earned, and realized I was no longer standing on the outside of anything. When I got home, I set my notebook back on the counter and opened it to the first page. Under the original rules, I added a fifth line: "Those who've learned to listen get a permanent seat." I closed it and left it there next to the bouquet my mother had brought, now drying at the edges, but still beautiful in the fading light. The story wasn't over, but the silence had finally changed its shape. It no longer carried shame, it carried peace. A few weeks after Talia's dinner, life settled into something that finally felt like balance. The noise that used to fill my head, those endless questions about who I needed to please, who I needed to forgive, had gone quiet. I woke up earlier these days, not because I had to, but because mornings felt like mine again. The sun filtered through my curtains, gentle and golden, and I'd sit with a cup of coffee, letting the stillness remind me of how far I'd come. My phone buzzed one morning with a new message from Vanessa. It was a photo her and Dad standing in front of the community garden near their neighborhood. She'd written, "Your idea worked. We planted the first row today." I smiled. Weeks earlier, I'd suggested they volunteer together something small, something steady, to rebuild what had been broken. It seemed to be working. Beneath her text was another from Mom dinner next Sunday. "No pressure, just us." I didn't reply right away. I set the phone down and let the words settle. For years, invitations from them came wrapped in expectation, unspoken rules about what I owed and how I should behave. But this felt different. It wasn't an order, it was an opening. I decided to go. That Sunday, I arrived carrying a pie I'd baked myself, pecan Dad's favorite. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. The porch swing creaked when I stepped up, and when Mom opened the door, she looked both surprised and relieved. "You came," she said softly. I said I would. I answered. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, green beans, and too many stories about the garden. Dad talked about soil like it was something sacred. Mom laughed more than I'd heard in years, and Vanessa looked relaxed in a way I didn't recognize. For once, I wasn't waiting for a sharp comment or a side glance. The air felt honest, unforced. When dessert came, Dad reached for a slice of pie and said, "This is the first Sunday we've all been at the same table in years." I looked around and realized he was right. And it wasn't the old table, the one where silence meant survival. This was new. We didn't need to pretend anymore. I wasn't their peacekeeper, their wallet, or their shadow. I was just part of the circle, equal present, unburdened. After dinner, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the air cooling against our faces. Vanessa leaned back in the chair beside me. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. "Rose Ember." I nodded. "Sometimes," I said, "but not with anger anymore." She looked down, twisting her ring. "I still do." I wish I'd known how deep that cut went. I reached for her hand. "You do now," I said. "That's enough." She smiled, small but real, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a performance. As I drove home later, the road ahead glowed faintly in the evening light. The kind of calm that used to feel impossible now felt earned. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't about winning. It was choosing to keep walking, even when no one clapped for it. When I got home, I opened my notebook, the one filled with notes and promises from those long, uncertain months. I flipped to the page titled "Rules for My Table." The list had grown over time, each line a reminder of lessons learned the hard way. I read them slowly. No one who makes you feel invisible gets to eat first. Love without respect isn't love. Silence isn't grace when it costs your dignity. You don't need their chair if you can build your own. Then beneath the last rule, I wrote a final one. Peace is not a place you find. It's something you choose again and again. I closed the notebook, exhaled, and let the quiet fill the room. Outside, the city pulsed with distant life, but here it was just me, steady whole, and finally at home in my own story. Before I turned off the light, I sent one last message to my mother. Dinner was lovely. Let's do it again sometime. A moment later, her reply came, "Anytime, sweetheart. And next time you pick the table." I smiled, knowing she didn't just mean the restaurant. She meant the space between us, the one we'd finally learned to share without hurting each other. I looked around my apartment at the table where this whole journey began and felt a warmth rise in my chest. Maybe that's the real kind of justice, not revenge, not vindication, but reclaiming your peace so completely that the past no longer has power over it. I'd walked away once to save myself, but I'd returned to prove that survival could still make room for grace. And now every time I sit down, whether it's with friends, family, or just the quiet company of my own thoughts, I remember that table by the trash can. Not as a wound, but as a beginning. It was the moment I stopped begging for a seat and started building my own. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched something in you, if you've ever had to build your own table, take a moment to share it, or simply reflect on how far you've come. Because sometimes peace begins with one quiet no and the courage to never apologize for it again.